Good morning, everyone. We come to the last Torah portion in Genesis and Bereshit, where the brothers of Joseph are reunited with their brother Joseph and their father Jacob and live the last 17 years of Jacob's life in peace and harmony. And the climax of this reunion was in last week's Torah portion, when Joseph makes the great reveal and says, "I am your brother Joseph, is my father still alive?" And the Torah says he weeps on the shoulders of each and his brothers, and he kisses them. And then the Torah adds a few words, "Ve'acharechein dibru echavito," that after Joseph kisses his brothers and cries on their shoulders, and afterwards, the Torah says, the brothers spoke with him. And the question is, what is the Torah adding? If the Torah already said they hugged and they kissed, what more is the Torah adding by saying, and they spoke to one another? You know, in New York City, the New York Times in the past 3 months has run 13 articles against the religious Hasidic Orthodox community. And you know, in New York City, anti-Semitism has doubled in the last year. And 94% of the attacks were against religious Jews because they're identifiable. At the same time, the New York Times chose to write 13 cover stories. Now, no one's saying that everything's perfect in every community. But when a newspaper chooses to single out one community 13 times in 3 months, once a week for cover stories, that's like the double standard that the world has with Israel. And that's what spikes and causes anti-Semitism to grow. And so how did the Orthodox Hasidic community respond? They took out big billboards all over New York City, and they said, learn who we really are. Get to know us. And they established a website called knowus.org. And on this website, they discuss and refute all of these articles which were hit pieces against the religious community, and they show the good side of the community, the beauty of the community, the cohesiveness of the community, the unity of the communities, the kindness that goes on in the community, the education system for its true goodness and worth. And I thought this was a very positive approach to dealing with the matter. Instead of shunning and othering others, say, come, we invite you in, learn about us, get to know us. Because when we get to know one another, that's when the stereotyping and the biases and the hate begin to fade away, and we realize we're really one like another. As opposed to what I read recently with the new government of Israel being established, that a group of 330 rabbis signed a letter saying that they will not welcome members of this government into their temples and synagogues because they're too radical and right-wing. And what I thought to myself was, on the contrary, if you disagree with someone, all the reason to invite them in so you could hear their perspective and discuss and have dialogue and debate them. By locking them out of your synagogues, how will you ever resolve the conflict? And here rabbis point out that when the hatred began between Joseph and the brothers, the Torah says they were jealous of him because he had a coat of many colors. They despised him. They hated him. And then the Torah said, in the beginning of the story, V'lo yechlu echav l'daber, the brothers were not able to speak to him. Communication had broken down. And so therefore, at the climax of the story, when the brothers are reunited, the Torah says he kissed them and he hugged them and he cried on their shoulders. Then the Torah adds the words, and afterwards the brothers spoke to him, taking us back to how the tragedy began, when they stopped speaking to one another. Now finally they were speaking again. What did they talk about? The Torah doesn't tell us because it's irrelevant. The tremendous accomplishment is that they were speaking. Never stop speaking to one another. Even if you have an enemy, even if you despise someone, if you break down communication, there's no hope for reconciliation. It's a story told about a rabbi in Israel. And right next to the synagogue, there was a store that was open on Shabbat. And obviously, as an Israeli Jew, but he would put out all his merchandise and run his business right next to the synagogue. And the members of the synagogue try to tell him to stop. It's Shabbat. You're desecrating the holiness and the peace and the tranquility of Shabbat. But the man ignored them. And a big rift broke out between the members of the congregation and the storekeeper, the shopkeeper. One day the rabbi, who was a follower of the Vishnitzer Rebbe, came to the Vishnitzer Rebbe, and he discussed this problem with him. And he said, what should I do? We've told him to stop, and he doesn't listen. People have yelled at him and told him off. And the Rebbe said to him, tell me, do you love him? And he said, well, how can I love him? He's violating Shabbat right in front of the face of all of our congregants. Every Shabbat when we come to pray in peace and harmony, we have to see his business running. And how can I love him if he does that? And the Rebbe said, well, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's because you don't love him that he doesn't keep Shabbat. The Rebbe said, I advise you to go back and just love him. Not as a strategy, not as a tactic. Just start seeing the good in him and start loving him. So this rabbi went the next week, and on the way to synagogue, he went into the store to say Shabbat Shalom. The storekeeper thought he was coming to reprimand him again, and the storekeeper said, get out. Started yelling at the rabbi, and the rabbi said, no, I just came to wish you Shabbat Shalom. And he left. And the next day, the next week after week, he would just come in till they started talking to one another, and then he would hug him and give him a warm embrace for Shabbat Shalom. Well, it didn't take more than a few months until this Jew on his own one day didn't open his shop on Shabbat and showed up in the synagogue with the rabbi. If we truly see the good in one another, we look for the positive, and even when we disagree, we communicate with one another, then we can embrace each other with love. Joseph learns to hug and kiss his brothers, and his brothers learn to love him, and once again they could speak to one another. Let us strive in the coming year to turn to one another, even if we disagree, but at least never stop speaking, but rather trying to reconcile and re-embrace each other. Let this coming year be a year of peace and harmony and unity, not only in the world, but in our families and in our communities. Have a wonderful day.